Hey everybody, Chris Aversano here. Before we get going, a little word from today's sponsor, KVH. Connectivity without compromise. At sea, ship owners have always had to make a trade-off. Do you want speed or do you want reliability? With KVH, low Earth orbit solutions, you don't have to choose. OneWeb delivers enterprise-grade reliability and near global coverage. Starlink brings unmatched speed and affordability that crews love. KVH integrates them both, along with advanced network services, flexible data plan, and 24/7 global support. The result is seamless hybrid connectivity combining the reliability of OneWeb with the speed of Starlink, all managed by one trusted partner. KVH keeps your fleet always connected. Learn more at kvh.com. Welcome, everyone. You are listening to The Last Dinosaur, and I'm your host, Chris Aversano. This is the podcast where we explore the evolving maritime landscape and hear from the innovators leading the charge. Today's guest is Ari Marjamaa, CEO of Raa Labs, a Norwegian technology company helping the maritime industry adapt to today's challenges. They do this by providing reliable, high-quality vessel data. Raa Labs then collects, organizes, and shares operational vessel data for both onboard and onshore use. As part of the Wilhelmsen Group, Raa Labs builds on over 160 years of maritime expertise while leveraging modern technology to make data truly work for shipping. We're going to explore all of that. And Ari, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be on, Chris.
Well, we're really super happy to have you because this whole idea of really helping and enabling ship owners, cargo owners understand their data is definitely one of the challenges in our industry. But first, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about how you got to where you are today and leading up Raa Labs.
Great, thanks. So I am a little bit of a rare bird. I'm an economist by training, and I work in a technology company. That's the first default. But my background is I've been working with the maritime industry for the last 25 years, both as an academic. I led the research center at the Norwegian Management School where we focused on industry development and which industries were doing well and using sort of the Porter the sort of theories and doing a lot of studies on that. Living in Norway, the maritime industry was a natural sort of first place to start. And that kind of attracted me to this industry and the connectivity of countries and companies and competencies and all the intricacies that we all love. Then I moved on to DNV, where I was a management consultant for almost 10 years, working with a broad variety of owners and companies and problems and trying to use the knowledge in DNV and management consulting approach to solve different problems. After that, I started in Wallenius Wilhelmsen and ended up as part of the executive team, where I was responsible for digital and IT and transformation. That's kind of an interesting position. So we were then not only shaping the company, we were also shaping the technology that we were going to use going forward. And that gave me the vantage point to start understanding some of the challenges when it comes to data and how hard it is to be an owner and digitalize. So I think that's sort of in short the steps that got me to this seat.
That's really interesting. Certainly being an economist and now being on the digital side, it may seem strange, but I think there's a lot of people who aren't pure digital people in the digital side of the business, myself included. We talked before. I'm a seafarer. I went to one of the maritime schools. I have an MBA. I've used to be a broker, and now I kind of have this interest here. Talk a little bit about, we've talked about how you've gotten into the industry, but how did Raa Labs come about, especially being part of the broader Wilhelmsen Group?
Yep. So as I was saying, I was part of the executive team, and my responsibility was to not only drive the normal IT operation and what we were doing on shore, but also increasingly at that point in time, in the mid 2016, 2017, where the whole digitalization drive was starting to kick off. And one of the first questions I had in that role was, what kind of data do we get from the vessels? And the answer was a little bit disappointing because we weren't getting all that much data. So there were noon reports and the second question, sort of answer that came was also, a little bit like, so what are we going to use the data for? So it tells me that there's a technology challenge and there's a cultural, operational challenge as well. So that kind of got us started on a pretty large program that Wallenius Wilhelmsen has been running up until today, where I was just part of the beginning, where sort of transforming the way that company is using data, and they're absolutely in the forefront sort of today. But it also led us to the point where we realized that getting data from the vessels isn't that easy. There are lots of challenges, and when we looked in the market at sort of what players were available and what kind of solutions were available, they weren't really tailored to the needs of an owner. So many of them were coming from either an equipment manufacturer, which has sort of their needs and tailors their solutions to what makes sense from the equipment point of view. There were some application providers who wanted to get data to fill into the application, but obviously that just fits then the need of the application. You're seeing that you're kind of ending up with these sort of verticals and holes in between them. So what we were saying is that instead of thinking vertically, maybe we should think sort of horizontally. Maybe there's a data layer missing that's irrespective of which system, what kind of source you're getting the data from, or where the data goes. So that became sort of the founding idea of what Raa Labs was supposed to do. And we set out then to build the data solution or IoT solution that a vessel owner would want. And part of that is that as a vessel owner, you've been around. So you probably talk to a lot of shipping companies. And generally what you will hear is the refrain that we are so unique because we do X, Y, and Z. And we can't do that and we can't do this because we are special. And I think that's one of the things that we also recognize, that it is actually true that most companies are special in their very own way. So thinking that we could create a solution that went all the way from the source to the end user seemed a little bit daunting, because you would end up making something that fits one or two, but doesn't really fit the majority. So we decided to be very, very focused when we built Raa Labs and really have a very narrow strategy where our focus is to provide the data that enables analytics anywhere, either on the vessel or on shore, but we do not do the analytics. We just deliver the data. So in some ways, you could think of us as a utility company that delivers your power with certain quality and certain reliability and a certain efficiency. And then you buy the appliances and you decide how you want to use that data. And that's exactly the role we take. It's just that it's not electricity, it's bits and bytes that we deliver. So I think that there was some very different thinking in how we approached it, because we came from the ship owner perspective as part of Wallenius Wilhelmsen, but also as part of the broader Wilhelmsen group, where we have different sort of angles coming into ship owning and sort of ship operation.
Right. And you have, again, the owning side, the agency side, all the different parts. One of the challenges I think that this industry struggles with is standardization of that data. And I think that is one of the biggest unseen, untalked about challenges that I've faced. And I go back to very early in my career, having a philosophical discussion on the bridge of the ship with a captain that didn't want to have a philosophical discussion. We were trading in Jones Act, Texas to Florida. Something that is unique to that, when you hit the Gulf Stream coming around Key West, you pick up a lot of speed. So we were doing a noon report, and the captain says, okay. And so we did 12 and a half knots. I said, speed, whatever, an ETA. And I filled it out. And he's like, well, why are you using 12 and a half? Like, we got this whole philosophical conversation about what to use. Am I going to use the estimated because I know we'll go like 16 or 17 or whatever it was? Or do I use what we have? So even just speed on a noon, is it speed over ground? Is it speed made? Is it, all these different things that if you look at it can mean different things to different people. So I'd really love to hear about how you are facing that challenge, again, through the lens of everybody thinks they're unique, but it's kind of like what you tell your kids. Yes, you are special to us, really. But
I think you're pointing to a really, really great sort of challenge. And just to be clear, there will be a need for some sort of noon reporting for a long time. we are not at all opposed to noon reports or the concept of having average reporting. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it will still reside. There are a couple of challenges as we see it. One is that the way that you create the noon report is typically quite a manual one, and you have data available on the vessel that is actually the data that you sort of compile, but you're not connecting the two. You have a person in between that reads something and writes something and puts something, and maybe he does that 3 or 4 times because there are different reports to be filled in. So the way we think about it is that you have the data available in terms of high frequency sensor data that should be leveraged and fed into new reports or in any other place where you want to use it. And then the real job of the reporting is to say, does this make sense? Do I agree to it? And so forth. You should use the factual data that is available. And we should make it simple for seafarers to do that because they have enough to do already. So by thinking about digital tools, it's not about more, it's actually about less. You should make it easier to do the jobs that you have to do. And when it comes, if we pick up on the standardization point, because I think that's really interesting. I think it's important that we first of all, there's a value chain, and there are different types of data throughout the value chain. So we obviously focus on the early part, where sort of the vessel operation part and the vessel type of data. If you think about the port call, there are different types of data, different challenges. If you think about the bill of lading, there are different challenges. Along the value chain, you have different types of standardization issues. There is a tendency to say standardization, but it's not quite clear which part of the value chain you're thinking of. So you might have a little bit confusing discussions around data standardization and what it actually means if you're thinking about the port call and I'm thinking about the main engine. That becomes very sort of hard. Having said that, and within our remit and what we focus on, when we started out in 2018, there was a lot of talk about getting to one standard for the industry. So this is how we report data, and that's what it should be called, and that would be sort of the dream scenario. There are 90,000 vessels out there, and most of them, I would say 99%, has different data on board. That's the reality when you start to connect. Different namings, different scalings, different unit of measures for the same value, for the same data point. So instead of thinking about how we get to one standard, what we have done at Raa Labs is to think about how do we easily create a contextualization engine that takes whatever comes in and puts it out in a format that's recognizable and understandable. So we're sort of solving the standardization using software and domain expertise, and try to do that as efficiently as possible. You can get standardized data even if it's not standardized to begin with. That's really core part of what we do. Take complexity on the vessel, create simplicity and flexibility in the data that we deliver, and make it easy to work with.
One of the most important points that you touched upon, and I think it's part of the some of the challenges, but it could be maybe an opportunity. And certainly it's a little bit of the change are the seafarers, right? And I think you touched upon this because you focus on the ship owners and kind of packaging and delivering that data and dealing with the challenges and what the data means to who is a big part of it. I think you just elaborated that wonderfully. Talk about your experiences with the seafarers and how they view what you're trying to do and kind of some of the feedback that you get from them, good, bad, and ugly, of course.
Well, first of all, I have to say that we have yet to meet as someone on board who doesn't, ultimately want to run the vessel as good as possible and who doesn't want to sort of do the right thing. I think everyone sort of has a love for their vessel and they want to do the best they can. There is certain cognitive overload in terms of all the tasks you have to do and all the systems you have to manage and I think we use this image that in a way we've kind of maxed out on all the levers that we can push and pull as humans. So we need to use tools to help us improve what we can do because we are in a way maxed out on that. So I think we have found a lot of really interested, enthusiastic and engaged sailors on the vessels who have helped us, they've provided input and they are interested in what we're trying to do. I think they recognize that what we are providing is really just the raw material that needs to be put into practice. So in a way, we're just the enabler for however they're going to use it. And it's up to the company and the organization to decide how do we use this data the best. And that leads me to that other part. What we're doing is part technology. Technology is relatively straightforward. The really hard part is the organizational part. So when you have the data, it's ready and it's standardized, you can trust that it's good quality. How do you use it and what do you do next? And I think that's the real challenge for a lot of owners and operators and ship management companies out there. How do we make sense of this?
To me, that's a change management, cultural change
Absolutely.
sort of
Yeah,
thing.
absolutely.
When you are talking to the folks bringing it back on shore about this concept and this management and other types of change, walk us through a little bit about some of the pushback you get and maybe some of the surprises in the good way that you see, especially as, let's say, companies start to become more tech savvy. They bring younger folks in, the next generation, who are more tech native. I think you and I are I think we described Gen X as tech transient. In other words, we started off with a corded phone and now we have an iPhone. We started off with a record player and now we have streaming music. My parents kind of were very different. They came into the technology much later in life. My kids don't know how to dial a rotary phone. So the Gen X group, or that group that's in, let's say, the mid 40s to early 60s, who are leading companies now, have the advantage of being able to see both sides. But as the younger folks who are very savvy come in, still maybe face some of those headwinds, how do you go about and talk about what you're trying to accomplish and changing it up without, let's say, what could be successful businesses?
I think that's a really, really interesting question. In a way, you could say very early in a dialogue with a potential customer, you sort of understand where they are in this journey. There are a few telltales. So one of the factors for success, or things that need to be in place, the first and probably most important, at least in the beginning, is that you need to have management buy-in. You need to have an understanding from senior management that this is what we want to do, and this is what that entails. And the management buy-in is not there just to bless the initial investment, but it's mostly there to understand and recognize that this will take time. Because what we are doing is actually to change the way that we run certain parts of the business. And it's fundamental change. If you don't change, you're probably not doing it right. And it's like getting a gym membership. It actually entails going to the gym. I've been doing that
wrong the whole time.
Exactly. So I think a lot of seasoned companies that fall into the trap of getting the membership, but they aren't sort of fully committed to making the change. So the management commitment is really important. And I'm a bad salesman in that sense, because I'm saying it's going to take a long time. It's not necessarily getting the data or buying the application or getting the analytics, but it's changing the ways that you operate. Stop doing things, begin doing things in a very different way. This takes time. And then the second part, which I think is also somewhat overlooked, is that by becoming digital, you're likely also looking at structural change in your organization. So there's likely departments that need to be created or teams that need to be set up that you don't currently have. That it might not just be sort of what you initially would think, data scientists in a corner and they're wearing the hoodies and all of that. It could just as well be your most experienced captains and a couple of tech-savvy guys who get together. Or it's about how you manage the data or you manage the application. There are lots of different things that you need to think about how you do. But there is structural change sort of included. And then obviously, as you alluded to, you need to have new competence, because it's a fact that most shipping companies, owners and operators, are very lean organizations, and they don't have a lot of extra capacity or a lot of extra people hanging around waiting for something to do. And they don't necessarily have a lot of these people that are in the group that you said, that tech savvy and pretty agile and ready to change how they work. So I think that those three things are quite important. And then ultimately you need to have an idea of what you want to do. So where do we start? So do we look at the voyage optimization, routing? Do we do something on the performance side? Or do we have a completely different use case, which is, again, unique to the way we operate and the challenges that we have? But you have to kind of tick all of those points. Otherwise, you will find that you run out of steam at some point in time because you aren't set up right. So, and I don't think that is, particular to maritime digitalization. I think it's a general theme for most things that you sort of introduce in the organization. But it is easy to overlook because we fall in love with the solution and then we think that it will fix itself. That's not the case.
Yeah, I've seen that. And then you always get certain people who say, well, it doesn't do this one little thing, and they will stop everything and make everybody else's life kind of difficult because of that. And I think in addition to management buy-in, I think you kind of alluded to it, you also need champions within the organization.
Yep.
It's great if it happens naturally, if can be effective if it doesn't. But if you have somebody who says, wow, this is fantastic. Yeah, I know it doesn't do everything, but geez, aren't you guys saving like a half an hour a day because we don't have to do this and we can actually manage our ships, we can actually buy the bunkers or whatever the thing that they do, or they're hired to do instead of whatever the underlying data process is. And I think that that's kind of interesting. One of the other things, challenges, and I don't think it's specific or unique to maritime that we run into is, of course, this kind of relatively short-term mentality. Oh, it didn't work after 2 quarters, let's bin it, when it could be a longer-term thing. One of the areas that data has become extremely important in, and this is how it ties in, is decarbonization of the fleet. Because I was at a conference and heard somebody say, decarbonization is good because I spend less money on fuel, which means my bottom line is higher. If you spend less money on fuel, you're going to make more money. That's a pretty easy relationship. Talk a little bit about what you're seeing in kind of the data, how people are using it or thinking about it, and this push towards decarbonization and the changing headwinds that are happening there with IMO, with the U.S. on again, off again, love affair with this concept. But I think the world is moving in that direction that kind of whatever the U.S. is doing, it's not going to be.
Tell it if it's on again or if it's off again, but
Well, yeah. But so curious to hear, how folks are using this in the decarbonization discussion and really the focus there.
I think you had a good example of entering the current and having to figure out the number for the NUN report. You have a lot of the granularity level that we're used to thinking of in terms of 24 hours kind of omits a lot of activities and choices that are being made throughout. So it is becoming increasingly clear that, again, coming back to that cognitive overload, to move to the next level, we have to increase the granularity. You have to look at more of those smaller actions and choices that are being made, and we need to provide the crew with guidance and help to make the right ones. So it feels a little bit less like a question of whether we should have high frequency data or not. And then the question is, where do you use it? The use case that we meet the most these days with owners is typically around voyage optimization, getting the right route and then sticking to it and changing depending on the factors, and using also vessel related information to do that the best possible way. That's been the one that everyone does something in. And of course, part of the regulations that have come in have kind of highlighted the need to have precise reporting. And if you do EU ETS and your numbers are off, then it will cost you money and so forth. So that's also driven quite a lot of focus on getting right numbers just to get the cost down. And then the decarb effects are, I think, a little bit secondary to that. But the good thing about fuel is that you do both in one shot. So it doesn't really matter which end of it you focus on. And then we see increasingly now there's been sort of a lot of talk for many years about the maintenance side. What can we do on condition-based maintenance or even predictive maintenance, that kind of thing. That seems to be coming back a little bit again, maybe with the latest AI craze, so to speak. So I think that's an on and off topic that's been around for a long time. And then we have customers who have more specific use cases to their situation. So if it's an HVAC optimization project, or if it's focused on hold cleaning and getting the right data to do that at the right point in time. The list is quite long, and many are probably generic from owner to owner. But I'm coming back to that point that you need to have a hypothesis for yourself. So how could we run our vessels better? What would I need to know in order to do that? And if you're not able to come up with that, then there's likely no silver bullet that will fix it for you. So it's, and for us, that's kind of challenging because we just deliver the data.
Right.
So we depend on either someone to have a good idea for the owners to do, or the owners themselves to be mature enough to be able to formulate that. So in a way, your utility company wouldn't sell a lot of power if you didn't have the light bulb or the PlayStation 5 or all of these things. So we need those appliances.
Yeah, you need the appliances, and I think it goes back to the management side. They need to understand the why of doing it.
Yep.
What is it? The management technique of asking the 5 or 7 whys. Why are we doing this? Why are we? And then you'll get down to, we need to save money. We need to be more competitive in the marketplace. We need to reduce, cost in compliance, maintenance, and cat maintenance, and things like that. One of the things that we look at a lot are things like AI and MI, and it's not really right where you are. You're just kind of putting the data into a way that can be read, and then the analytics get done. Is MI and AI something that can help what you're doing and help your clients as well?
Yeah, I think absolutely so. I've been attending a few conferences during 2025, and the theme overall has been AI and how much potential there is in that. I think it's a little bit ironic that the raw material that goes into AI, which is we're delivering part of that, is less talked about. Because you're not going to get a lot of good AI results if you don't have information to input. Otherwise, it's going to search the web and give you something funny. So I think that's really an important part, that you have to get your foundation in place. You need to have quality data reliably available. And then the AI part can start to really shine. We use AI as part of making our internal processes and the efficiency of what we do and the output, the quality of what we deliver, make that better. And ultimately, that might sort of seep into what we deliver to the customers. But I think we're more focused on enabling AI for others by delivering a really good raw material that they can use.
Right, and that gets into garbage in, garbage out, right? So
Absolutely. And I think what you'll see also is that AI starts to request different things. Or maybe you want different granularities, you want really high granularities, you want the quality becomes really important, that you can deliver a consistent quality. And of course, once you start to get value out of it, then you want it to be reliable. So if the data is not there, then that will be a problem. Where we focus is really on making sure that you have that foundation, and then you can build whatever you want on top of that. If that's AI, fine. If it's just a more traditional application, that's also fine. It's really about where you are on the journey.
That's interesting, because it also starts to talk a little bit about how people use the data and the different types of folks that use the data, not from a persona point of view, whether it's an engineer or a charter, but the different scale of companies. And we talked a little bit about this before we got going. You have these giant companies with a few hundred ships. They get all the headlines, but the maritime space has a long tail of ship owners that have far fewer ships, but especially with environmental regulations and certainly with safety and other regulations, they're beholden to the same rules as the big company. In your experience, how are these guys approaching it? What is their kind of view on getting to data that they can use and looking forward that way? Because I think that's an interesting discussion. These small, medium ship owners are often not in the news.
I think you're right about that, and we briefly touched upon it before we started. But I think it's important just to be clear that, as I said, digital maturity is not directly linked to size. There is, to some degree, an overrepresentation of digital maturity on the bigger ones because they have the capacity and they have they have the problems at such a scale that they need to find solutions to it. The challenge when you have 5 vessels is really that you're subscale on a lot of things. So it becomes harder to do that. But we have worked with owners with very few vessels who are super mature and really forward-leaning in what they want to achieve, but they need to approach it a little bit differently. So they can't build their own applications to give them performance advice. They need to source it outside. But I think that's also, as I said, we've had sort of this idea that if you're small, you should buy turnkey, a solution that does everything for you. I think that's underserving the needs of the smaller owners. And the way we think about it in a layered approach, where it's easy to basically pick the solution where you want to share the data to and how you want to use it, fits equally well for a small owner as it does for a large owner. I think over time, with growing sort of understanding of what is needed, we will see more of that across the industry, that you actually think in terms of layers. I'm getting my data, I'm putting it to use somewhere. When I want to change, it's easy to change. That's not so easy if you go turnkey.
I think it's going to be a very interesting dynamic in how does the turnkey allow for part of users to customize, right? Is it customizable turnkey? And I had this discussion recently with Ingrid from Clavinus Digital. She was talking about that exact thing, like how flexible can you be on APIs, allowing other data, maybe even with a competitor, or somebody described like a competitor, but collaborator. I forgot the word they use, like equivalent, make the equivalent to like a frenemy. You know, sometimes you do business.
Co-opetition, isn't that the word?
Yeah, co-opetition. That's what it was. Yeah. So how do you get to that point? And I think that's certainly on the horizon of challenges for the industry. One thing I do want to talk a little bit about, it's a little more agnostic to.
Before you go there, can I just throw in one comment? I think that's an interesting point that will hit both the smaller and the larger players. What we are seeing is increasingly both a need, but also a drive towards being able to share data. And when we've talked about sharing, it's been a little bit in that ideal state that you give it away to someone who does some research. That's one part. But if you have a vessel and it started out, then increasingly the charterer will want to have some data feed from the vessel. It might even be that it's a competition advantage that you're able to deliver data with the vessel. We see that vessels go into the larger systems where they already have an operating model and a way to use data. So if your vessel slots nicely into that and is able to deliver the way that the operator uses it, then that's easy for everyone. And you need to have good governance of that data sharing. So when does it begin? When does it stop? What is shared to whom? And that becomes difficult, not only for the small, but also actually for the bigger, because that's a competence in itself. And I think being able to easily make data available for multiple users is quite important as we go forward. So I would say it's not a KPI, but we're quite happy every time we see that one data point is used not only for more use cases, but by more users. Because the ROI for the owner in the initial sort of investment to get that data, really, really skyrockets. So I think that's really the driver and a really interesting sort of scale model. Once you start to realize that that's necessary for me to do, how can I do it in a good way?
Right.
Sorry to interrupt you, but
that's really good. But what I was going to pivot to is something a little more holistic. Recently in Norway, where you're based, they started a Norwegian Maritime AI hub, if I'm not mistaken. It just
we're actually part of that.
So I want to talk a little bit about that, talk about some of the goals, talk about how that came about, because I think it's fascinating and I think it's a real great model for different areas. I'm speaking at a conference next week about, can the maritime industry have a Silicon Valley? And I'm really curious. I'm really curious is, these sorts of consortiums and platforms like what's happening in Norway recently popping up. Talk about your feeling on that, what you think.
Well, I think we can absolutely have a Silicon Valley in maritime. I think there are already a few out there. If you look at the Norwegian perspective, and I'm coming back now to my academic period when we actually looked at what makes an industry good or bad, what makes it efficient or not. So one of the things that is really important is how you're able to connect across, what kind of meeting places you have, what kind of how to enable transaction between people. And in Norway, one of the things that we have is a high degree of trust. And we also are a relatively small country, so you end up knowing, you know someone who knows someone. So it's easy to connect across. And I think that's one of the drivers when it comes to, particularly on the new technologies, the new frontiers, where we've been really good at leveraging that closeness of the community and the availability of the competence. So if you look to electric vessels, Norway has been a leader. If you look to autonomous vessels, we are a leader. And just one floor down from where we're seated in the Wilhelmsen building, we have Masterly, which is a leading player in the autonomous operation of vessels. And I think that closeness makes it very easy to bump into someone and have that innovative spark. And I think the AI center that's been set up now is really pulling together all sorts of players from the maritime space, competition and collaborators alike, to create an arena to foster focus on AI. I don't think that's the one and only solution. There are many things like that, but it's part of what makes Norway really good at this and creating that drive. And you have other hubs as well. You see Singapore has been really good at doing a little bit the same. And it's not just the proximity, but proximity really helps. So the fact that you meet someone on your way to work or on the bus or in the grocery store, it simplifies things.
It totally does. It absolutely does. And I think in the U.S., you're spread out and you have a lot of different other diverse factors. And I think one of the things that hurts the U.S. a little bit is the sea blindness. In other words, people only care or think about the maritime space when they turn on their morning news and there's a container ship sitting sideways in the Suez Canal, or they don't have toilet paper at Walmart, or their gas prices or their gas station has run out. Although that hasn't happened in a very long time. That's the only time here in the U.S. people think about shipping, whereas countries like Singapore, Norway, and others have a more direct relationship with what happens at sea. And I think that that's very noticeable for sure.
And also worth noting that in Norway, shipping has been a high prestige profession. So it's been an industry that you were proud to work for. Whereas in many other countries, if you say that you work in shipping, you get looked at sideways. So what's that? Well, so then you say logistics, because that sounds a little bit better. So I think that's important also for the role that you play and the kind of attention you get, and not to be understated.
I think it has a lot to do with it. I think if you look at when I tell people what I've done, they kind of look at me and okay, and I get kind of a lot of puzzled looks, especially in the community that I live in, a lot of finance. And I kind of say, well, one of the biggest areas to finance is shipping. So you know how expensive those ships are? So it makes for interesting dialogue. As I wrap up, I love to ask this question. You're a CEO, you're on the go. What do you throw in your bag these days when you're traveling or trying to, put your feet up after a long day? And that answer can be, I don't read. I listen to audiobooks, which I had somebody say that, very prominent person who said she has some dyslexia and she prefers to listen to audiobooks, which I thought was a wonderful thing to share with people. And I've had other people say, I have kids, leave me alone. I read the same book every night. And I've had people tell me they write books. So where do we fall on that scale?
That's a big act to follow. Well, I read quite a lot, and I also listen to audiobooks. So I admit that straight. If you ask my wife, she doesn't love my earplugs because I wear them all the time and I listen to books.
Same thing.
But that's very efficient because you get to read a lot. So at the moment, I actually started just reading. I'm reading that. It's a book called Breakneck by a guy called Dan Wang. It's sort of comparing US and China, and the gist of it is that the Chinese, in his words, China is an engineering culture. You build your way out of problems, and the US has become a lawyer culture where you kind of do legal stuff and focus more on the law. I read there were 3 times more lawyers in the US than in Europe per capita, which might be a good or bad thing. But this point is not to judge, but to evaluate the responses to problems that come and how they are guided by this fundamental setup of how the culture exists. So in China, you build the road, or you build something to change problems, and in the US you have a different approach. And then he's sort of trying to think about what will that mean. And for me, I think the interesting part is that I live in Europe, and we have had the Draghi report came out recently with quite a bad judgment when it comes to innovation and our ability to get out of this regulatory trap that we've fallen a little bit into. So it's interesting to try to see what happens in both sides of us, and how can we change that. It's been quite an interesting read so far. So I haven't made it to the end, but
it sounds very interesting. And one of the things that a parallel that I've tried to do as I've gotten older is, and I think it's almost a little bit at a higher level of a mindset, right? How do you react to problems and things? Now you're talking more about a culture and a country, but I think that could be boiled down to individuals. How do I react to something? Do I want to buy my way out of it? Do I want to engineer? Am I going to fix the problem? Am I going to ignore the problem? And I think that gets into a very interesting mindset. Certainly as I've matured, I try to take a deep breath. Okay, what's the real problem here? All right, this isn't really a problem. So let's just move on with life. And there's no need to get excited about things. And again, I'm oversimplifying. All right, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have in Norway a famous writer called Knut Hamsun, and he wrote a poem which is called "In 100 Years, Everything is Forgotten."
Yeah, well,
that's both a joy and a sorrow. So whatever you do today, it's going to be forgotten. Whatever you do today, if you mess up today, it's also going to be forgotten.
It's also got forgotten.
It's a really nice poem, actually. Good advice.
It's a good way to reflect upon those things and to look at the bigger picture sort of thing. We'll get into that in my philosophical podcast that I'll start, called Coffee Thoughts with Ari and Chris there. But it was great. It was great to have you on. Great to learn about Raa Labs and what you're doing. Really fantastic stuff. And also really what I really appreciated is the approach that was a little unique to me, is that we're not trying to give you analytics. We're not trying to help you make decisions. We're just trying to put it in a structure that you can do that with, and you being the ship owner, the cargo owner, anybody along the lines that the ultimate purchaser of the service cares to share with. So it was a really fascinating discussion, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.